You've probably heard of me. If you've ever passed through the town of Harmony Creek, you have. I am Lila Petrova, and in this town, a place stitched together by long memories and short roads, my name means one thing: honey cakes. Not just any honey cakes, my grandmother's recipe, the kind of cakes that taste like a childhood you wish you'd had, the kind of cakes that have single-handedly kept the lights on in my small, perpetually struggling bakery, Petrova's Pastries. It's a legacy in a town that worships legacy. But sometimes, when a story is told for long enough, people forget what it's really about. If you've ever felt like your life's work was misunderstood, or worse, undervalued, then you need to hear this. Let me know in the comments if this sounds familiar, because for the longest time I felt like I was screaming into the void. It helps to know you're not alone. My story, the real story, begins not with a betrayal but with an offer. It was a Tuesday. The air was thick with the smell of caramelized honey and toasted walnuts, a scent so familiar it was like a part of my own skin. My sister Elena swept into the bakery, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and quiet desperation. She didn't belong here anymore. She was a Warren now, having married Liam Warren, the sole heir to the Warren consolidated fortune. The Warrens weren't just the town's wealthiest family, they were the town's gravity. They'd built the mills, the factories, the very foundations of Harmony Creek. And now they were watching their legacy crumble, starting with their newest, flashiest venture, a Michelin star-chasing restaurant called Ember that was failing spectacularly. Elena smiled, a tight, practiced thing that didn't reach her eyes. She ran a manicured finger over a flour-dusted countertop, her expression a perfect blend of pity and condescension. She said, "Lila, honey, we need to talk." I knew what was coming. It was the same conversation we'd had a dozen times over the last year. She wanted the recipe. My grandmother's honey cake recipe. She saw it as a silver bullet, a populist pastry that could save their pretentious, overpriced restaurant from its own irrelevance. Her offers had always been insulting, a fraction of what the recipe was truly worth, not just in dollars but in history. It was the heart of my business, the soul of my family. This time, her voice had a different edge, a tremor of panic. She told me Ember was weeks from closing. Liam was under immense pressure from his father. She named a number. It was higher than before, but still felt like she was trying to buy a cathedral for the price of its bricks. It wasn't about the money, I told her, for the 100th time. It's not for sale, Elena. It's family. She looked at me, and for a second the mask slipped. I saw the raw, clawing fear of a woman whose entire identity was tied to a man's success. She saw my bakery, my simple life, not as something I'd built, but as something I was clinging to out of spite. She thought I was hoarding my one small treasure to watch her fail. Her tone shifted. It became sweet, cloying. She apologized. She said she was just stressed. She hugged me, a stiff, awkward embrace that felt more like a search than an act of affection. She bought a dozen honey cakes, paid in cash, and told me to think about it. She said, "We're sisters, Lila. We should be helping each other." I watched her leave, her sleek electric car a silent ghost gliding down the humble main street. I felt a familiar ache, a mix of pity and exhaustion. The sister I grew up with was a fading photograph, replaced by this polished, desperate stranger. I turned back to my ovens, pushed the encounter from my mind, and finished my day. It wasn't until the next morning, Wednesday, that I realized what had really happened. I came in before sunrise, the air still cool and damp. I went to the small, fireproof safe in my office where I kept the two most important things I owned. I entered the combination. The heavy door swung open. The cash box was there. My grandfather's watch was there. But the other box, the old hand-carved cherrywood box that held my grandmother's legacy, was gone. A cold fist closed around my heart. I knew, instantly. The hug. She hadn't been hugging me. She'd been feeling for the outline of the keys in my apron pocket. The cash for the cakes was a distraction, a performance. She had come back in the night, used my own keys and stolen it. My sister, my only sister, had robbed me. She had stolen the secret that kept my little bakery alive, all to prop up her husband's failing monument to ego. I sank into my worn office chair, the smell of yeast and sugar suddenly nauseating. The silence of the pre-dawn bakery was deafening, and in that silence, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. Because what Elena didn't know, what no one in this town knew, was that she had made a terrible, terrible mistake. She thought she'd stolen a recipe for honey cakes. But the book she took, The one bound in worn dark leather with the faded Petrova crest wasn't for baking. It was the original, handwritten formula for the industrial chemical solvent my grandfather invented 50 years ago. The one the Warren family had stolen, corrupted, and then buried, along with my grandfather's name. The one that was irrefutable proof of an environmental crime that their entire fortune was built upon. She hadn't stolen my future. She had stolen a ghost, and that ghost was about to burn her entire world to the ground. That feeling, sitting there in the dark, wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was something deeper, colder. It was the click of a lock, a sound I had been waiting to hear my entire life without even realizing it. The betrayal was absolute, a clean cut. But it wasn't the wound that I focused on. It was the opening it created. For the first time, I saw the path forward not as a winding uphill struggle, but as a straight, clear line. The first wave that hit me wasn't anger. It was a profound, hollowed-out sorrow. I closed my eyes and I wasn't in my bakery office anymore. I was a child, maybe 7 years old, standing on a stool in my grandmother's kitchen, Baba Analia. She was a fortress of a woman with hands that were perpetually dusted with flour and a scent of cinnamon and quiet strength. The air was always warm around her. That kitchen was my sanctuary. Elena never understood it. She was all sharp angles and bright colors, chasing butterflies in the yard, demanding attention, the beautiful favored one. I was quiet, methodical, content to watch my grandmother's hands as she worked, turning simple ingredients into something magical. Baba Analia had 2 books. They were almost identical, both bound in dark leather, kept side by side on a high shelf. One was filled with her elegant looping script, detailing recipes for breads and pastries and the famous honey cakes. The other was filled with my grandfather's handwriting, tight, precise, full of chemical equations and technical diagrams. To a child, they were just 2 old books, but even then, I knew one was for life, for sustenance. The other felt heavy. It felt like a secret. My grandmother would sometimes take down my grandfather's book, her face a mask of sorrow and fierce pride. She'd trace the diagrams with her finger and whisper in Bulgarian, "He was a giant, Lilia." They made him small, but he was a giant. I didn't understand then. I just knew it was important. I knew it was a source of pain. My grandfather, Ivan Petrova, died before I was born. The town's memory of him was a faded, tragic story. A brilliant but unstable chemist, they said. A man who had a falling out with his business partner, the great Alistair Warren, the founder of the dynasty. A man who, they whispered, lost his mind. He died a broken man, his name a footnote in the grand, soaring narrative of the Warren family's success. But that wasn't the story my grandmother told me in the quiet moments between kneading dough and waiting for the bread to rise. Her story was one of betrayal. Ivan Petrova had invented a miracle. A powerful, biodegradable solvent that could clean industrial machinery without leaving a single toxic trace. It was revolutionary. He partnered with a young, ambitious Alistair Warren to bring it to market. They built a small factory on the edge of town, by the creek. But Alistair was impatient. He saw a shortcut. He realized that by substituting one key organic compound with a cheaper, more volatile petroleum byproduct, he could produce the solvent for 1/10 of the cost. It was still effective, but it was no longer biodegradable. It was poison. When my grandfather discovered the change, he was furious. He confronted Alistair, threatening to expose him, to reveal that the Warren Wonder Solve they were selling to factories up and down the state was a toxic nightmare. Alistair's response was swift and brutal. He used his growing wealth and influence to paint my grandfather as a madman. He forged documents suggesting Ivan was unstable, that his original formula was dangerously flawed. He paid off local officials and bought the silence of the factory workers. My grandfather was professionally and socially annihilated. He lost the patent, the factory, his reputation, everything. The stress, my grandmother always said, is what put him in an early grave. Alistair Warren didn't just steal a formula, he stole a man's life. And the poison seeped. Warren Consolidated grew into an empire, all built on that cheap, toxic solvent. They used it in their own mills, their own manufacturing plants, all located in and around Harmony Creek. For 50 years, the byproducts of that stolen, corrupted formula had been quietly leaching into the soil, into the groundwater, into the very creek that gave our town its name. The Warrens knew. They had to have known. Their Warren Family Charitable Foundation, the town's beloved philanthropic arm, wasn't about charity. I understood that now. It was an elaborate slush fund, a tool for public relations and, more importantly, for quietly buying up the properties of families who got sick, for funding skewed environmental studies, for suppressing any whispers of contamination. It was a 50-year cover-up. These memories weren't just flashbacks, they were evidence. They were the context for the cold fury that was now solidifying in my chest. I thought about Elena, my sister. Growing up, her selfishness had been casual, almost thoughtless. She'd borrow my favorite sweater, and it would come back stained or not at all. She'd steal the credit for a school project I'd done most of the work on. Small, petty cruelties that I had always forgiven because she was my sister. But this was different. She had married into the family that had destroyed ours. And she either didn't know, which was an act of willful ignorance so profound it was a sin in itself, or she did know, and she simply didn't care. I wasn't sure which was worse. Her desire to preserve her comfortable, luxurious life was so great that she was willing to commit the same sin Alistair Warren had committed 50 years ago. She had come to a Petrova to steal their legacy to save a Warren's fortune. The symmetry was sickening. The sorrow in my chest began to burn. It wasn't a hot, reckless fire. It was a cold, blue flame, the kind that forges steel. I stood up and walked from my office back into the bakery. The sun was starting to rise, casting long shadows across the floor. I saw it all with a new clarity. This little shop wasn't just a business, it was an act of defiance. My grandmother, Baba Anelia, had built this place from nothing after my grandfather was ruined. She took her grief and her anger, and she baked it into bread. She poured her resilience and her love into cakes, and she kept his secret. She hid his life's work in plain sight, disguised as her own. She had built a fortress of sugar and flour around a core of righteous anger. The real honey cake recipe, the one Elena had been trying to buy, was in the other book, the one that was still in my safe, the one bound in the same leather, but with a small, almost invisible carving of a honeybee on the spine, a detail Elena, in her haste and arrogance, would have never noticed. My grandmother was a genius. She hadn't just created a decoy, she had created a weapon, a truth bomb, waiting for the right person to light the fuse. That was the catalyst. The full, crushing weight of my grandmother's foresight. She had trusted me. She had trusted that one day I would be strong enough to understand the whole story. I went back to the safe, my hands steady now. I took out the real recipe book. Tucked into the last page was a folded, brittle piece of paper. It was a letter, written in her familiar script. "My dearest Leela," it began. "If you are reading this, then the time has come. You have a good heart, a quiet heart, but you have your grandfather's iron in your spine. I know you do. The world knows us for our honey, for sweetness, but you and I, we know the secret. Our family's foundation is not sugar, but stone and fire. The book they will one day come for is not a treasure, it is a key. It unlocks a debt that must be paid. Do not seek vengeance, my love. Vengeance is a hot, messy fire that consumes everything. Seek balance. The world is out of balance. The Warrens have taken too much and given back lies. It is your task to restore it. This was never about revenge. It was about justice. Some debts are not paid with money, but with truth. Be wise. Be brave. I am with you always. Your Baba Anelia." I folded the letter, my knuckles white. The last of the sorrow was gone, burned away by the cold flame of resolve. My grandmother hadn't just left me a recipe. She had left me a mission, and Elena, in her greed, had just handed me the perfect opportunity to begin. She thought she was holding a recipe. In reality, she was holding a confession, a 50-year-old confession, signed in my grandfather's name, that would unravel the entire Warren dynasty. It wasn't about the cakes anymore. It was never just about the cakes. It was about the ingredients, the poison they'd been feeding this town for half a century, and I was about to serve them the antidote. This plan wasn't born in the fiery moment of discovering the theft. It was a slow crystallization of facts and feelings that had been taking shape for years, long before Elena forced my hand. After my grandmother passed away, I inherited more than just the bakery and 2 leather-bound books. I inherited a legacy of whispers, a history of unanswered questions. The official story of my grandfather, the one the town accepted, never sat right with me. It felt thin, like a poorly patched wall, so I started digging, quietly, methodically. My foresight wasn't a flash of brilliance, it was the result of patient, lonely work. It started in the town archives, a dusty, neglected room in the basement of the library. I spent my evenings there, after closing the bakery, smelling of sugar in a place that smelled of decaying paper. I read through 50 years of council meeting minutes, property deeds, and business permits, and I started to see a pattern. The Warrens, through their charitable foundation, had a peculiar habit of buying up specific plots of land along the creek. They were always distressed sales, a family farm that had suddenly gone barren, a small house where the owners had fallen ill with a string of unexplainable ailments. The foundation would swoop in, offering a generous price, and the families, grateful and broken, would leave town. On paper, it was philanthropy. In reality, it was a systematic acquisition of every piece of land their poison had touched. I cross-referenced these deeds with an old, hand-drawn map I found tucked into my grandfather's journal. It was a hydrogeological survey, far ahead of its time. He had mapped the likely spread of a toxic plume from the factory site, predicting with chilling accuracy which areas would be contaminated over the coming decades. Every single property the Warren Foundation had purchased fell within his projected contamination zone. It was a blueprint of their guilt. But a map and old deeds weren't enough. I needed an ally, someone who understood the town's history not as a story, but as a series of legal and personal entanglements. That's when I sought out Arthur Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy was the town's oldest lawyer, a man whose office was a museum of forgotten cases and local secrets. His father, it turned out, had been my grandfather Ivan's lawyer, and his only real friend after Alistair Warren had ruined him. Arthur was semi-retired, spending most of his days tending to his roses, but his mind was as sharp as a shard of glass. I went to him one afternoon, carrying my grandfather's journal. I didn't know what to expect. He ushered me into his study, a room that smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. I laid out the journal, the map, and the copies of the deeds I'd found. I told him what I suspected. He listened without interruption, his face impassive. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he stood up, walked over to a large locked filing cabinet, and retrieved a dusty folio. He said, "My father knew Alistair Warren was a crook. He just couldn't prove it. Alistair was too powerful, too ruthless. My father tried. He gathered affidavits. He collected evidence. But witnesses were threatened. Documents disappeared. After your grandfather died, my father locked everything away. He told me to wait. Wait for a Petrova with enough fire to see it through." He opened the folio. Inside were notarized statements from 2 factory workers who had been fired for questioning the chemical changes. There was a copy of the original partnership agreement between Ivan and Alistair, an agreement that explicitly stated any changes to the formula required mutual consent. And there was a heartbreaking, detailed account written by my grandfather, documenting the theft of his intellectual property and the subsequent campaign of slander against him. Mr. Abernathy had been waiting for me for 40 years. He became my silent partner, my strategist. He helped me understand the legal labyrinth the Warrens had constructed. Their empire was a maze of shell corporations and holding companies, designed to insulate the family from any liability. But Mr. Abernathy showed me the one thread that connected them all: the land. The contaminated land was their original sin, and it was their greatest vulnerability. He helped me draft the charter for a new entity, the Harmony Creek Restoration Project, a public benefit corporation with a single stated mission of environmental remediation. It was a legal vessel, waiting to be filled. I owned it, but on paper it was just a dormant company, one of thousands filed with the state. This wasn't just about exposing a crime, it was about preparing the solution. "You can't just tear something down," Mr. Abernathy told me. "You have to be ready to build something better in its place." My other ally was closer to home. Maria, whose mother had worked for my grandmother, was the backbone of my bakery. She was quiet, fiercely loyal, and she saw everything. Her family had been in Harmony Creek for generations. They had seen the slow decay. They knew which families had left suddenly, which wells had gone bad. She was my eyes and ears, a living library of the town's unofficial history. She knew I was looking into things, though she never asked what. She would just leave a small note on my desk sometimes. The Millers, on Ridge Road. Their boy was always sick. Warren Foundation bought them out in '88, or ask about the fish kill in '94. They hushed that up fast. She was feeding me the human cost of the Warrens' greed, grounding my research in real pain. So when Elena walked out of my bakery with my grandfather's journal, she wasn't just stealing a book. She was stepping into a meticulously prepared trap, one that had been laid not just by me, but by my grandmother, by Arthur Abernathy, and by the ghosts of an entire community. My hidden leverage was a three-legged stool. First, the stolen journal itself. It was the scientific proof, the origin of the crime. In the hands of a real chemist, it would not only expose the current Warren solvent as a toxic variant, but would also provide the recipe for the clean, safe alternative. It was both the poison and the antidote. Second, the legal framework. Mr. Abernathy's folio of evidence, combined with my research and the Public Benefit Corporation, gave us the legal machinery to act. We didn't need to go to the press and create a scandal. A scandal could be managed, spun. We could go directly to the source of their power, their board of directors, their investors, the very people who had the most to lose from a multi-billion-dollar environmental liability lawsuit. Third, and most importantly, was the moral high ground. This wasn't a corporate raid. It wasn't blackmail. This was about justice. It was about cleaning a wound that had been festering for half a century. The plan that formed in my mind was not to destroy the Warrens. That would be too easy, and it would throw the town, whose economy depended on them, into chaos. The plan was to force them to fund their own redemption, to use their vast resources to clean up the mess they had made, using my grandfather's original brilliant formula. I would take their poisoned land and heal it. I would take their dirty money and wash it clean. Elena thought she had stolen a simple secret to a cake, a small, sweet thing to solve a small, temporary problem. What she had actually done was deliver the primary evidence of a massive, generational crime into the hands of her enemies, thinking it was a gift for her husband. The irony was so profound it was almost beautiful. My plan was set. All I had to do was wait for her to realize that she couldn't bake a cake with chemical formulas. And the panic that would follow would be the overture to my symphony. The first move had to be silent. A whisper, not a shout. A rock tossed into the still, dark pond of the Warrens' secrets, just to watch the ripples spread. Direct confrontation with Elena was pointless. She was a symptom, not the disease. My target was the system that had created her, the corporate entity that ran on secrets and arrogance. My sister, in her frantic attempt to salvage her husband's culinary disaster, would be my unwitting messenger. I imagined the scene at Ember's state-of-the-art kitchen. Liam Warren, a man whose ambition had always outstripped his talent, presenting the stolen book to his world-renowned chef, the confusion turning to irritation as they flipped through pages of complex diagrams and chemical notations. I could almost hear the chef's bewildered pronouncement. "What is this?" "A chemistry textbook." The humiliation would be the first crack in Elena's perfect facade. She would be forced to come back to me, not as a thief, but as a supplicant, confused and angry. That would be my chance to control the narrative. But my real first move was aimed much higher. Mr. Abernathy had identified a key figure on the Warren Consolidated Board, a man named David Chen. Chen was the newest member, a sharp investment banker from outside Harmony Creek, who had a reputation for due diligence and a low tolerance for the old boys club mentality. He wasn't emotionally invested in the Warren family mythology. He was invested in numbers, risk, and liability. He was our entry point. We didn't send him a threatening letter. That would be too crude, too easily dismissed as a crank. Instead, Mr. Abernathy, using an encrypted email address and a secure, anonymous file-sharing service, sent a single-page document to Chen's private account. The subject line was simply, "Due diligence question re Harmony Creek Development Project." The document was a scan of one page from my grandfather's journal. It was his projection of groundwater contamination, showing the toxic plume spreading directly beneath the land slated for the Warrens' new luxury housing development, Creekwood Estates. Alongside it, we included a copy of the falsified rosy environmental impact report the Warrens had submitted to the town planning board. The two documents told a terrifying story without a single word of accusation. It was a simple presentation of conflicting data. It was a question disguised as a statement. And then, we waited. 2 days later, the phone in the bakery rang. It was Elena. Her voice was brittle, a thin sheet of ice trying not to crack. She said, "Lila, we need to talk about this recipe." It's not right." I feigned confusion. "Not right? It's Baba's recipe, Elena. I've been using it for years. Maybe your fancy chefs are overthinking it." She insisted I come to the restaurant. I politely declined. "I'm very busy, Elena. The holidays are coming up. You know how it is. But I tell you what, I said, my voice full of false generosity. Bring the book over to the bakery this afternoon, and I'll walk you through it myself, step by step. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I had just cornered her. She couldn't admit she'd stolen it, and she couldn't let anyone else see the book now that she knew it was something strange and complicated. She was trapped. She agreed to come, her voice tight with suppressed rage. Her arrival was a study in controlled panic. She clutched the leather-bound journal to her chest like a shield. She looked haggard, the polished veneer stripped away to reveal the raw anxiety beneath. We sat at a small table in the corner of the empty bakery. She pushed the book across the table. Explain it, she demanded. I opened it. I pretended to study the pages, my face a mask of serene concentration. Ah, I see the problem, I said, tapping a finger on a complex molecular diagram. This part is tricky. You see, the fructose-keto-hexose reaction needs to be catalyzed at a very specific temperature. Any deviation and the entire structure collapses. I was spouting scientific-sounding nonsense, weaving real chemical terms into a completely fictitious baking process. I watched her face, the confusion, the frustration, the dawning horror that she was so far out of her depth she was drowning. This isn't a recipe, she finally whispered, the fight going out of her. What is this, Lila? I looked at her, my expression one of deep, sorrowful pity. I said, Elena, it's the original. Baba's first draft. It's very complicated. She was a very scientific woman, you know, before she simplified it for the rest of us. I let the lie hang in the air, the lie that this was just a more complex version of the honey cake recipe, a version only a true Petrova could understand. I was establishing my ownership, my unique expertise. I was making the stolen object useless to her, but priceless in my hands. She left that day more confused and powerless than when she had arrived. She still had the book, but now it was a source of dread, not hope. She knew it was a secret, but she had no idea what the secret was. Meanwhile, the real seed we had planted was beginning to sprout. Mr. Abernathy got a call from a contact in the city. David Chen had, on his own authority, hired an independent hydrogeological firm, a discreet, high-priced company from out of state, to conduct secret soil and water tests on the Creekwood Estates property. They were working at night, their equipment disguised. The official story was they were doing a routine survey for a new fiber optic cable installation. The panic in the Warren Empire started as a low hum, an electrical current of anxiety that only those at the very top could feel. Liam's father, Richard Warren, a cold, imperious man who had inherited his father Alistair's ruthlessness but none of his charm, started making calls. He was a man who hated surprises, and he was getting a lot of them. A board member was asking pointed, difficult questions. His son's flagship restaurant was a financial black hole, and his daughter-in-law was apparently trying to bake cakes using a chemistry manual. The pressure on Liam and Elena must have been immense. Their small, selfish drama was being dwarfed by a much larger, more dangerous crisis that they couldn't even see. They were termites in a house that was about to be hit by a wrecking ball. The silent takeover was in motion. We hadn't fired a shot, but the enemy's fortress was already beginning to tremble from within. The beauty of the plan was its silence. The Warrens couldn't fight what they couldn't see. They were being dismantled by their own secrets, undone by a 50-year-old ghost that my sister had foolishly invited into their home. The power shift didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, creeping tide pulling the ground out from under the Warrens' feet while they were too busy looking at the horizon. Their power in Harmony Creek was built on two things: economic control and the illusion of benevolent leadership. My plan targeted both. The first pillar to wobble was their economic dominance. The results from David Chen's secret environmental tests came back, and they were, as Mr. Abernathy gleefully reported to me, apocalyptic. The level of contamination in both the soil and the groundwater under the proposed Creekwood Estates was not just above legal limits. It was at a level that would trigger a federal environmental emergency. The leaked page from my grandfather's journal hadn't been an exaggeration. It had been conservative. Chen, now armed with irrefutable, independently verified data, called an emergency, closed-door meeting of the Warren Consolidated Board. He didn't reveal his source. He didn't have to. He simply presented the findings of his hired firm. The panic was no longer a low hum, it was a blaring alarm. The board immediately and unanimously voted to halt the Creekwood Estates project indefinitely, citing unforeseen geological complications. They also froze capital expenditures on all non-essential projects, including the planned expansion of their main chemical plant. The news hit the town like a cold wave. The Creekwood development was meant to be the town's next big economic boom. Suddenly, construction contracts were canceled. Jobs that had been promised vanished. The town's economy, so long tethered to the whims of the Warrens, began to seize up. People started whispering. They started asking questions. The carefully crafted image of Warren Consolidated as the town's stable paternal provider began to crack. Their perceived clients, the townspeople, the investors, the local businesses were starting to lose faith. It was a client exodus in slow motion. This is when the Warrens made their desperate countermove. It was exactly what Mr. Abernathy had predicted. When powerful men are cornered, they have two moves: intimidation and bribery. One evening, a black town car, the kind that absorbs light, pulled up in front of my bakery. A man in a suit got out and informed me that Mr. Richard Warren wished to see me. It wasn't a request. I was escorted to the Warren estate, a sprawling mansion on a hill overlooking the town it slowly poisoned. It was a house built to intimidate, all stone and dark wood and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Richard Warren was waiting for me in his study, a room that felt like a courtroom. Liam and Elena were there, standing behind him like two pale, nervous teenagers. Elena wouldn't meet my eyes. Richard Warren did not waste time with pleasantries. He had the aura of a man who had never been told no. He said, "Let's stop playing games, Miss Petrova. I don't know what you think you have, or what you think you're doing, but it stops now." He slid a checkbook across his vast, polished desk. "Name your price. I will give you a sum of money that will allow you and your little cake shop to disappear from my town and my life forever." He thought it was blackmail. He thought I was a common extortionist. The insult was so profound, so dismissive of my family's history and pain, that it almost made me laugh. I looked at the checkbook, then at his cold, arrogant face. "It wasn't about the money," I said, the words echoing the ones I had spoken to my sister just weeks before. This time, however, they were not a defense. They were a weapon. He sneered. "Of course it's about the money. It's always about the money. What else could a little baker from downtown possibly want?" I leaned forward slightly, my hands folded calmly on my lap. "I don't want your money, Mr. Warren. I want your land." He stared at me, his arrogance momentarily pierced by confusion. "I want the land your foundation has acquired over the past 50 years. All of it." I slid a folder, prepared by Mr. Abernathy, across the desk. It contained a list of every contaminated parcel, the same ones from my grandfather's map. "You will transfer the deeds to my public benefit corporation, the Harmony Creek Restoration Project, and you will provide a seed grant to fund its initial operations." "A grant," I added, looking him directly in the eye, "equal to the total projected profits from the now-cancelled Creekwood Estates development." Silence. The air in the room was thick with it. Liam looked like he was going to be sick. Elena was as white as a sheet. Richard Warren was looking at me as if I had grown a second head. He was a shark, and I had just offered him a deal that had nothing to do with blood. He couldn't comprehend it. "This isn't a negotiation," I said quietly. "It's a strategic asset transfer. You have a significant liability on your books. A toxic asset, you might say. I am offering you a way to divest yourself of that liability cleanly and quietly. No press, no federal investigation, no class action lawsuits, just a quiet transfer. You get to spin it as the largest philanthropic gift in the town's history. You become the hero, and I get to clean up your mess." I had used their own language, the cold, bloodless terminology of corporate warfare, to describe an act of profound historical justice. I wasn't asking for damages. I was offering a solution that would cost them a fortune, but would save them from total ruin. Richard Warren, for the first time in his life, was speechless. He was looking at a baker, the granddaughter of the man his father had destroyed, and realizing she wasn't holding a knife to his throat. She was holding a key, and she was the only one who could unlock the door he had just realized was trapping him. The power had shifted. It was no longer in his hands. It was sitting calmly in my lap, smelling faintly of flour and yeast. The final act didn't play out in a boardroom or a lawyer's office. The paperwork, the transfers, the legal machinations, all of that happened quietly, efficiently, handled by Mr. Abernathy and the Warrens' terrified legal team. They had no choice. David Chen and a growing faction of the board made it clear that if Richard didn't accept my terms, they would vote him out and deal with me directly, likely bringing in federal regulators in the process. My offer was their only escape route. They took it. The Warren Consolidated Press machine went into overdrive, announcing a landmark environmental stewardship program led by a new independent entity to preserve the natural beauty of Harmony Creek. They painted it as a visionary act of corporate charity. Richard Warren was lauded on the front page of the local paper, his smug face beaming next to a headline about his family's generosity. Only a handful of us knew he had been checkmated. My vindication wasn't in that headline. It came in a much quieter, more personal form. A few days after the announcement, Elena came to the bakery. It was late and I was cashing out the register. She didn't sweep in this time. She entered like a ghost, hesitant and broken. The expensive clothes hung on her like a costume. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shame. She stood across the counter from me, the same counter where she had tried to buy my soul for a pittance. She said, "I read it, the whole thing. After you left the mansion, I took the book and I read it all night. I looked up the chemical terms. I read about grandfather Ivan. I read what they did to him." Her voice was a ragged whisper. "You're destroying them, Lila. You're destroying my family." I finished counting the day's earnings and looked up at her, my gaze steady. "I'm not destroying anything, Elena. I'm cleaning. For 50 years, your husband's family has been poisoning this town, this land, our family's name. They built an empire on a lie, and that lie has a cost. Now the bill is due." She started to cry, silent, wretched tears. "But he's my husband. What are we supposed to do?" I felt a pang of something, not pity, but a deep, sorrowful understanding of the chasm between us. "This was never about the cakes, Elena," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "It was about the ingredients. You came in here and you tried to take the one thing our family had left, the sweetness Baba Analia created out of all that bitterness, and you wanted to use it to prop up the very people who caused the pain in the first place. You didn't just steal a book. You tried to steal our story and rewrite the ending." She flinched as if I'd struck her. I continued. "Baba left us 2 legacies, the honey cakes to help us survive, and grandfather's journal to help us find justice. You took the wrong one, or maybe," I said, looking at her, "you took the one you were meant to take. Maybe you were the only person who could carry that truth bomb into the heart of their fortress." She stared at me, the full devastating weight of her role in this unfolding drama finally dawning on her. She had been the catalyst, the unwitting agent of her own undoing. She hadn't been a thief. She'd been a tool of a justice that was 50 years overdue. There was nothing more to say. She turned and walked out of the bakery, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the ghost of the sister I once knew. The new reality began to set in. The Harmony Creek Restoration Project was now one of the most well-funded environmental charities in the state. I hired a team of bright young scientists and engineers. Our headquarters wasn't some gleaming corporate office, but a repurposed barn on one of the newly acquired farms. Our first project was to begin implementing my grandfather's original, biodegradable solvent formula to start cleaning the machinery at the old Warren plant, the source of the contamination. We were using his genius to erase the damage done by their greed. A few weeks later, Mr. Abernathy brought me the news. Richard Warren had been forced to step down as CEO of Warren Consolidated. The board, led by David Chen, had installed a new, professional management team with a mandate for transparency. Liam and Elena quietly sold their house and left Harmony Creek. Their restaurant Ember closed for good, its fancy sign taken down, leaving just a blank space on the building. They weren't ruined in a spectacular public way. They just faded. They became irrelevant, their power dissolving like sugar in water. It was a quiet, systemic correction. This was never about revenge. It was about balance. The scales, so long tipped in their favor, had finally been set right. I stood on a hill overlooking the valley, the deed to hundreds of acres of my town's land in my hand. Beside me was my team, looking at soil charts and water tables. For the first time, the air in Harmony Creek felt like it was truly clearing. The work would take decades, but it had begun. My grandfather's name would be on the patent for the remediation process. His legacy, once buried, was now the town's salvation. My life didn't change dramatically. I didn't move into a mansion on the hill. I stayed in my small apartment above the bakery. I still get up before dawn. I still bake, but something is different. The bakery is no longer a fortress built for survival. It's an anchor, a testament to the fact that you can build a future without erasing the past. On the wall of my small office, next to the framed deed transfer, I hung a new sign. It's for the honey cakes. It reads, "The Amelia Ivan Legacy Cakes." The recipe is still a secret, but the story isn't. Not anymore. So I ask you, what is the secret recipe in your life? What is that thing, that skill, that idea, that piece of your own history that is uniquely and truly yours? It might be something you think is small, something the world has told you is of little value, but our stories, our truths, are the most powerful assets we will ever own. They are the foundation of our worth. Never let anyone convince you to sell them for pennies on the dollar. Never let anyone, not even the people you love, tell you that your legacy is a trifle to be traded away for their comfort. Your value isn't determined by the title on your business card or the approval of those in power. It's in the work of your hands, the integrity of your mind, the history you carry in your bones. Protect it, cultivate it. And when the time comes, know that it is not a shield to hide behind, but a key to unlock the future you deserve. This entire journey taught me that true power isn't about tearing things down. It's about having the strength, the foresight, and the courage to build something better in its place. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt like your contribution was overlooked or your worth was underestimated, please let me know in the comments below. Sharing our stories is how we remind each other that we are not alone. It truly helps. And if you believe, as I do, that our deepest value lies in our integrity, then like this video, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power, and hit that subscribe button to join a community that believes in building, not breaking. Thank you for listening.